Hello and welcome to the May 12th edition of the DRF Players Podcast. I'm Peter Thomas Fornatal here with you alongside DRF formulator Mike Hogan. Mike, how you doing today?
Doing well, Pete. It's funny. This is one of the first times we've done one of these without seeing each other's faces, so it's a little odd.
Yeah, we're definitely doing a lower fi version of the podcast today with the people who know about technical things ensconced away in Baltimore. I'm actually in my home office in the unfashionable part of Brooklyn. Mike's back there in the DRF studios, though not in our studio that we're usually in, but hopefully you'll bear with us and we'll come up with some good stuff in this next hour or so. We're going to start off by looking back at the public handicapper races. We're going to do a little tournament talk. We're going to talk about the Preakness, of course, and then if there's time, I might launch into a little tale from the track. Let's start off talking about public handicapper. It was a very chalky weekend on there. I did manage to sort of accidentally luck into one of the winners, AP Indian, probably in large part because AP Indian was 6-1 in the morning line. Did you have any success this week on there, Mike, or was it too chalky for you?
It was a little too chalky for me. The closest I had in terms of any success, really, actually, no. I don't even think I hit the board in any of them. So I need bigger prices than what I was likely to get on Saturday. So that's okay, though. That's okay. Those days happen.
Of course, and the other important thing to note about all contests, not just the public handicapper contest, is if you don't win, you want the chalk to win because you don't get hurt. So very often in a contest, you'll see a lot of happy people when the 8-5 and the 5-2 run 1-2 in the exacta. You just say, okay, chalk, no harm done. What's next? And that was kind of the weekend it was in total in the public handicapper challenge. Should point out to people, if they haven't joined in yet, it's not too late, especially because there has been a lot of chalk in the first couple of weeks. You can join in. This contest goes all the way through the Breeders' Cup, and you can win your spot to the National Handicapping Championship for free. Additionally, there are weekly prizes and monthly prizes in the public handicapper contest. Go to publichandicapper.com for all the details. Let's go through these races, Mike. The first race was the 57th running of the Man of War, Twilight Eclipse, so often a bridesmaid to spectacular horses, especially main sequence. That rival not here today. Twilight Eclipse gets the job done. What were your impressions of this race?
Well, it's funny. This race was, I thought, run quite similarly to the Beaugay, which was 2 races prior on the Belmont card, where Discreet Mark got away with really kind of a walking lead with Murder on the front end, and the race kind of broke out the same sort of way with War Dancer getting a half in 50 and 3. Discreet Mark 2 races prior had gotten the half in 50 and 4. And so that's why you saw War Dancer hanging on and almost pulling off the upset at 8-1. But as it turned out, Twilight Eclipse was able to finally get that Grade 1 win, and just got up at the wire. And really, any horse that was running from off the pace. I know you picked Dynamic Sky, I picked Hardest Core. Imagining was trying to rally. None of them really had much of a shot of closing into such a slow pace. That's kind of the way I saw that race.
I don't disagree. Couple of quick notes from my point of view. Thought it was a very canny ride by Castellano. It was like he didn't want to make the lead too early, I think. Maybe he's concerned that Twilight Eclipse has a tendency to hang a little bit on the money late in these races, but with that perfectly produced run, he didn't have that option. Castellano sort of forced him to win. I agree about the upgrade of Dynamic Sky from a pace point of view. Imagining, I didn't think broke well. I would definitely give him another chance. Ortiz sort of wrangled him back off the slow pace. That's rarely a recipe for success. And Hardest Core was kind of a bad actor. I think Hyper also was kind of a bad actor before the race, which is often you can leave your race on the racetrack sometimes when you're not acting well beforehand. I think I think this was a pretty solid little field, and a lot of these horses at a tactical disadvantage could run better next time. Moving on from there, we'll go to the 11th race at Monmouth, the decathlon. I mentioned before I came up with AP Indian at all of 220-1. Probably wouldn't have bothered had I known the actual price, but 6-1 on the morning line, I figured why not. I don't have a whole lot to say about this other than I thought AP Indian looked like a legit player in the sprint division from this one, and the 105 buyer AP Indian earned suggests that my visual impression was probably right. Anything to add on this one?
Yeah, well, that 105 buyer was the highest buyer speed figure of any race over the weekend, so certainly the numbers are bearing that impression out. I think he looks like a legit player going forward. As a 5-year-old, still a little bit lightly raced. And one thing of note that I mentioned on the podcast on Friday, he's a half to Tiz Shady, who ran actually on the undercard of the Man of War in the Peter Pan earlier on Saturday. We may get to that later as we look ahead to the Preakness, but the only other thing I'll say about the decathlon was it was a race I was really excited to play prior to Saturday because it was a 14-horse field. It looked like there were a lot of ways you could go. You mentioned, Pete, AP Indian 6-1 on the morning line. I think part of that was a function of such a large field. Having 4 scratches due to so many different cross-entered horses really ended up hurting the price of a couple of them, particularly the 1-2 runners, AP Indian Favorite Tail. But it also scratched out some legitimate pace players, which I think perhaps hindered some of the horses that were looking to rally from off the pace, including the one I picked, Javert, who really just kind of ran around the track, ran an even 7th, and never threatened one bit.
The next race we're going to talk about is the Golden Poppy Stakes from Golden Gate. I have to admit, I kind of watched this one once out of the corner of my eye. I like Theater Star off what I took to be a prep race on the downhill at Santa Anita. Theater Star ran all right. Central Heat got the money at 220 to 1. That's $2.20, not 220 to 1. The buyer speed figure says maybe it wasn't such a great race, an 82 figure. Did you have any take on this one?
No, not really. I picked Humoristica thinking, she had some class from a pedigree standpoint, and, I think I saw this as an opportunity for them to get some black type in her, and, Eric Wing had noted the concern about sending her up to Golden Gate to get the black type, and maybe she just wasn't that good, and she kind of proved that on Saturday, was never threatening and just beat one horse.
Any thoughts about the winner, Central Heat, going forward?
I think Central Heat is a good Golden Gate horse, good Golden Gate turf horse. I don't see her threatening any of the good turfers down in Southern California unless she improves quite a bit off that effort. I thought it was, it was a good race, but as a 6-year-old mare, I think that's probably her peak there.
I thought the other super duper impressive performance of the public handicapper races came in the American, a grade 3 at Santa Anita. Bali Abali, the Brazilian Triple Crown winner, appeared with a lot of hype, and I thought ran to, if not through the hype, not only earning a triple-digit buyer figure, but it was the way Bali Abali did it. I thought showed a lot of class running between horses, got stopped at a time, well, not really stopped, but had to sort of half check at a time that would have really hurt a lot of horses' momentum, went through a hole that was barely there, kind of exploded through, and showed that turn of foot I associate with grade 1 turf horses in this grade 3. Am I overselling Bala Bali here, Mike, or what do you think?
No, I don't think so at all. I think he by far the best horse in that field, which was a relatively good field. Salco's a good improving horse, and Winning Prize is a good turf stakes runner, and even some of the ones that didn't hit the board. I know you and I both picked Home Run Kitten, who's a good horse himself. I thought he just toyed with that field. I thought once Flavian Pratt got him to the lead, he really just kind of eased up on him and let him just do his thing. Was never threatened once he got to the front, and looks like he could be one that really could make a lot of noise in the graded stakes turf races, especially even going further, because it seemed like one of the questions I had, especially at the short price, was is a mile even long enough for him?
That's a good point, though I would think with the potential gaping hole in the mile division, depending on what we ever see from Wise Dan, that this could be a division that he could, with that turn of foot, really make an impact in. What are we hearing about Wise Dan? Has there been any scuttlebutt back at the DRF offices? What's the plan with him?
I haven't heard a thing. I know last I heard they were targeting Saratoga. I guess there's still time for that to be the case, but the clock certainly is ticking, and he's a little older, so maybe it takes a little longer for them to heal. But as far as I know, there have been at least no public setbacks, and I don't see any reason why we wouldn't see him at some point later in the summer. But you're right. I mean, the way Bala Bali ran, I think he could really, they could stretch him out and he could do some damage. They could keep him at a mile, and he's a legit player. The 100 buyer certainly bears that out, and visually he couldn't have been much more impressive, especially considering he probably needed the race, and wow, what a great story, especially coming back from that bout of laminitis, which might be the end of a career, let alone the life of many a horse, but he came back and didn't look like he missed a beat. That's
a great point. One of the reasons I wasn't in a hurry to lump on at a short price. Very hard for a horse to go through that kind of problem and still come back on top form, but in the more than capable hands of Dick Mandella, anything's possible, and very dangerous to give a trainer as good as Mandella options like he appears to have with Bala Bali. We're doing pretty well on time. I say we take a quick look at a couple of the other stakes races from the weekend. We go faster, I guess, when we just have two voices. We should point out, I should have given a shout out to our friend Matt Bernier at the top of the broadcast. He's not with us today because he's down in Baltimore, going to be part of the coverage not only for DRF Live this week, which you're not going to want to miss, but also I think going to be doing some work for our friends over at ESPN. Does that sound right?
That does sound right.
So yeah, we definitely miss having Matt here. His star continues to rise as our feet stand planted firmly on terra firma here back in New York. But speaking of other races, let's talk about the Las Barrera. I know you were very impressed with Kentuckian in this spot. It was an honest pace. It was very impressive visually. The figure came back a 100 buyer, which is certainly probably right around par for what you'd expect from a grade 3. But you had a case, Mike, I believe that this horse might even be better than grade 3 level. What are your thoughts on Kentuckian?
Well, I thought it was also a nice lead-in, too, with Bala Bali, another horse in Kentuckian who's owned by Rick Porter's Fox Hill Farm. So quite a great weekend for Rick Porter down at Santa Anita, taking both of the stakes races there, both grade 3s, with a couple of horses that look like they really could be any kind. Kentuckian doing that in his third start and earning a 100 buyer. Of course, Bala Bali in the first start in the U.S. So there's a lot of similarities. The difference, of course, being Kentuckian is only a 3-year-old, and in being by Tisnow, being out of an unbridled song mare, and I'm pulling up his pedigree right now. I believe he the dam is Forest Music. Does that name ring a bell to you, Pete? Is he half to one? No, or was she a good horse?
Forest Music. Forest Music was a runner.
Right. She was. I'm looking at her right now. She was a good sprinter.
Yeah, she was. I think she was owned by the Joneses, I'm guessing, and I can't remember who the trainer was, and I don't remember the career highlights. But that was what kind of form if you have it in front of you there?
So she was 6 for 18 lifetime with second and 5 third. She earned $370,000. She ended up with Stone Street in the barn of Steve Asmussen, but she debuted for Mark Sherman, and she debuted going 6 furlongs at Laurel in 2003. 3 weeks after that debut, by the way, she won by 8.5 lengths, just sprinting clear, much the best in her debut. About less than 3 weeks after that effort, she shows up at Santa Anita in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies. So, and where she set the pace before tiring, but clearly from the beginning they thought the world of this filly. She ended up jumping around into a few different barns, and I think ended her career being purchased by Stone Street. But she was a grade 2 winner. She won the honorable miss at Saratoga.
There you go.
She also won a couple other smaller stakes races, and she even connected to this week she won the Grade 3 Ms. Preakness at Pimlico. So
little foreshadowing there, and we even throw in something for our friends, the pedigree nerds here on the DRF Players Podcast today. A couple other races to talk about really quickly. You mentioned before the Peter Pan Made from Lucky looked visually good. Do you know what figure Made from Lucky got in that race?
I don't have it handy, but I can pull it up within a second.
My thoughts.
He did look pretty visually impressive in that one, I thought.
Yeah, I did think he was probably racing on the best part of the track. The inside, watching the tape from Belmont, Nick Tamaro had pointed out on Twitter that he thought maybe the inside wasn't the place to be. I think that from the tape I've watched, some things do bear that out. I thought the biggest effect of this wasn't so much, we've got another player for the Belmont, though I imagine they'll try, so much as I thought it was, more form flattering of our good friend American Pharaoh.
Absolutely. And, in retrospect, I think a lot of us were on 2 weeks off, and certainly I was before the race, just a horse that looked like on paper he had the pace advantage and the speed advantage over the rest of the field. But, stretching out an additional 2 furlongs kind of proved to be his undoing, and Made from Lucky picked up the pieces and, certainly looked good in doing it. But it looks like he got a 94 Beyer speed figure, which is good, but not on par with the best of his generation. So, it remains to be seen whether he'll be a player in the Grade 1s going forward. And, as you said, I'm sure they'll give it a shot.
Last race we should talk about before we move on to a little quick tournament talk here is the Diablo. Not a race that we would normally be discussing here on the Players Podcast, but it did see the return to the races of our friend Palace Malice. What did you think of Palace Malice's return to the races?
I thought it was about as you could predict. I think as a 4-5 favorite, going short off of that long layoff, with a horse that really seems to prefer 2 turns, it's the kind of favorite that I love to bet against any time I can. Unfortunately, you just had a 5-horse field, so even though the winner paid $11, it's not like the kind of value you'd have with a 4-5 favorite in a field twice the size of that. That said, I think for the connections of Palace Malice, I don't think you could have asked for a better return race. A good third, he should move forward off of that. I would imagine he'll stretch out off of that. And I didn't see anything that would make me concerned about him running in the Met Mile, which I believe is the next goal for him.
Yeah, most definitely the Met Mile is the next goal. It's a lot to ask, in a sense, for last year's winner of the Met Mile to come back just off that one prep. And to your point, when you and I and Matt discussed it on the Players Pod last year or early this year, when the schedule was announced, remember they announced Palace Malice's entire schedule in advance of the year. And we said one thing we found significant about it is if they happen to deviate from the schedule, which of course they did by not running in the Westchester to run in the Diablo instead, but if they're going to deviate from the schedule, bet against at least in that spot. And that's exactly what folks hopefully did. You're right, the size of the field meant there wasn't that much money to be made. We should at least mention the winner coming back quick off the claim, Stall Walking Dude, clearly now, who was the one where I probably would have had my money had I bet the race, not quite able to get the job done. Any further thoughts on that race, or should we move along to a little tournament talk?
No, it just seemed more like Clearly Now didn't want to win. The race came back relatively strong from a Beyer standpoint. Stall Walking Dude, and I'm imagining Clearly Now as well, since they were only a neck apart, earned a 100. But boy, Clearly Now has just been the kind of horse that you keep expecting this huge effort from, and he just seems like he doesn't really want to break through, and you got to be a little disappointed off of that effort. But I'm kind of with you. He would have been the one I would have leaned on relatively heavily, and I'm glad I didn't play the race.
Let's talk about tournaments for a minute. On Saturday, NHC Qualify is having a credit builder contest. Credit builders are a great opportunity to bankroll your contest play for the coming months. Another great thing about the credit builders on NHCQualify.com for newer players who haven't yet sort of committed to the $50 NHC Tour membership. And granted, there's no reason why you shouldn't do that. There's plenty of benefits, and pretty much anybody interested in playing tournaments should have one. But even if you don't have it yet, you can play in this credit builder, and depending on participation, first place is going to win $2,000. Pretty good way to get some money in your coffers and make your Assault on tournament play over the next bunch of months. Fun thing to do while enjoying Preakness Day. Also on Sunday, BC Qualify has another round one event. I love this month's format on bcqualify.com. You play in these round one events. There's one this Sunday, there's one next Sunday, there was one last Sunday. And what you have to do is finish in the top 10% of finishers. So let's say 320 people sign up. If you end up in the first 32, you get to advance to the second round. And then in the second round, once again, it's the top 10%, or maybe a little more than top 10, maybe it's 12.5% of players are going to win full $10,000 seats to the Breeders' Cup Betting Challenge. It's a great opportunity. It's a format that rewards consistency, and I highly recommend the players check it out. Also this weekend on drfqualify.com, we've got a couple of events. On Saturday, there is a qualifier for the June Santa Anita live bankroll contest. Of course, the Preakness Santa Anita contest is happening this weekend, so it's too late to qualify for that. But I'll be out there with a group of players, and we're going to have some fun hanging out in Front Runner and the Eddie Logan Suite, getting the VIP treatment for Santa Anita. If you want the VIP treatment for the June 27th and 28th Santa contest, play in that qualifier on Saturday. On Sunday, there is a qualifier for the Gulfstream Park September live bankroll event. You can win your $3,000 bankroll for that, or buy-in for that event, $2,000 of which acts as a live betting bank, $1,000 of which goes to the entry fee. These live bank contests are a lot of fun and a great opportunity to make some money. And even if you don't finish in the money, you get to keep whatever of your bankroll you have at the end of the weekend. So that's a nice incentive as well. Both those DRFQ contests are $90 per entry. I suggest folks check them out. All right, Mike, I think that leads us to the main event of our discussion here for this podcast, and that's the Preakness. We're not going to be able to do a show later in the week, though I do encourage folks to check out our webinar that you and I are going to be doing 2 sessions of on Thursday. That'll be after the draw. We'll go through the whole Preakness field then as well. How can folks sign up for the webinar?
Well, there's a couple ways. If you follow either of us on Twitter, I know, Pete, both you and I have tweeted out links for people to register. If you don't follow us on Twitter, you can go to drf.com. There are marquees promoting the 2 webinars. You can choose from the 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time one, or you can take the later one, which might work for those out on the West Coast a little bit better, which is 3 p.m. Eastern Time. If you're not able to miss, or if you're not able to make either of those, we do plan on having archived versions available for you to view, or even as we had with the Derby one, even if you're able to attend and you just want to go back and review some of the points that we made and take a look at some of the things that we're doing in Formulator, you can do that with the archived version as well.
I say for the Preakness, let's go through it since we're not doing post-position order. We just have these sort of homemade DRF PPs in front of us. Let's go from the bottom to the top. I think that'll make the discussion a little bit more interesting here. And that would mean we're starting off with Grand Billy, if that's how you pronounce it. I don't know much about this horse, Mike. Do you? Is this horse definitely running? What's going on?
I don't. I think he was mentioned as a potential runner early. I haven't heard much lately. He won for 2 Lifetime, won his debut for Gustavo Delgado down at Gulfstream, sprinting at 5.5 furlongs, then ran second in an optional claimer at 7 furlongs. I would be surprised if he shows up here at Preakness, at Pimlico in the one of the biggest, richest races of the year. That said, there have been a number of defections, and you might, if some of the top contenders stumble a little bit, both literally and figuratively, it might not take a whole lot to hit the board at a huge, both a huge price and to pull down a large share of a $1.5 million purse.
I'm going to steal your line here. Before you had told me that something along the lines of the nice thing you could say about Graham Billy is that on paper he probably has a better chance than Taylor Verve. I will second that emotion. Not a lot of time to spend on Taylor Verve for me, other than to point out that he was originally a surprise entrant in the Derby, made the AE list, but had to scratch there. Other than for the widest of wide spreads in the bottom of the superfecta, I can't really see using, and I'm not even sure if I'd use them.
Yeah, coming off a top buyer of 72 last out, where he beat a 6-horse field at odds of 3 to 5. I mean, those are not the makings of a horse that's going to run big and really threaten any of the top runners of his generation. And even worse, Dallas Stewart's record with these Grade 1 runners is well documented. If you followed me on Twitter, if you listen to us on the podcast, he deserves to be a huge price, and I would be surprised if he's able to even threaten running in the money.
Many years ago, I think the first year I ever went to the Preakness was 1997. Gosh, I wish I could remember the horse. But I was hanging out with a friend of mine. Gosh, I haven't talked to him in many, many years, but very nice guy, terrific student of racing, a guy named Kim Eisler. And I wish I could remember the name of the horse, but he pointed to the horse in the form and pointed out that the horse had just won the Tessio, and the horse was taking some money, whoever it was, in the 1997 Preakness. And he said, look at this, college-educated people betting their money on the Tessio winner in the Preakness. And I always remembered that, and subsequently have noted that the performance of the Tessio winner in the Preakness isn't very good, despite the Tessio being, of course, a local prep for the Preakness. This year's Tessio winner showing up in the Preakness, Bodhisattva. Anything to say on him?
Not really. I guess along the lines of the Tessio winner, I tweeted out a little earlier in the week that the last winner, and you're right, one of the Tessio runners ends up showing and trying his hand at the Preakness to really not much success. I think the last Tessio winner to take down the Preakness was Deputed Testimony in 1983. So it's certainly been a long drought, and they almost try nearly every year, it seems. He's going to really have to improve and run not only the best race of his life, but improve from the 91 figure, probably 10 to 15 points from what he did last out in winning the Tessio against a field of 5 other horses. I just don't see it.
As the great Andy Beyer is fond of saying, no shot. Let's move on to the page where the horses do have a chance to have an impact in this thing, or at least are a lot more likely to. Let's start with the stranger that I'm the most interested in. I'm not convinced he's fast enough, but in a contest situation where I needed a price in the Preakness, I might be looking long and hard at the improving Divining Rod. What's your take on this Arnaud Delacour runner?
Well, I've been a big fan of him since his debut, and I think the pedigree says that he wants to go longer, being out of Precious Kitten, who is a really good turf filly herself, and who is a foal to Kitten's Joy, who obviously is a top sire. Distance shouldn't be a problem. He's by Tappet. He looks like he wants to run all day. He seems to be getting better. That last race in the Lexington was the first race in his at least in his dirt races, where he hadn't run with a bar shoe. He had some foot issues. They took care of it. The foot issues seem to be in the past. He's one that I think you're right, of any of the ones not coming out of the Derby, he's the one I would want to maybe sprinkle into those exactas and trifectas.
Let's move on to Danzig Moon. I had made the point that I thought his bluegrass was maybe more the product of the way the track was playing that day, but I think by all accounts he improved in the Kentucky Derby. He was very much of a clocker darling that week as well, and now he comes back in 2 weeks for the Preakness. Can you spin a yarn why he might be able to turn the tables on the top 3 here in the Preakness?
Oh, well, sure. I mean, I guess the case for him is he's going to be sitting off of a pace, and if they go a little bit crazier in the Preakness than they went in the Derby, and they all start kind of gasping for air down the stretch, he seems the likeliest one to kind of pick up the pieces and maybe even inhale the front runners right at the wire. I could see it. I don't know if I would be betting my money that way, but he certainly looks like a good horse that's improving at the right time.
For me, Dortmund was the disappointment of the Derby. For all the talk that many had, that I sort of refuted on our last podcast from my view, that American Pharoah had this perfect trip, I thought Dortmund was the horse with the perfect trip. I know you mentioned turning for home. You were counting your money. You thought everything had looked so good. He ends up coming up relatively empty in the stretch, getting beat 3 by his stablemate and by Firing Line. Of course, there was also that talk that maybe he wasn't feeling so well in the days leading up to the race, that a few days before he had a little couple-hour bout with colic or colicky symptoms, however you want to say it. Is that enough to make you think he could maybe run better here, or do you think we've seen the best of Dortmund?
Oh, I don't know if we've seen the best of him. I mean, he's certainly, if that was a poor effort for Dortmund, running a strong third in the Kentucky Derby against 17 other runners is, if that's the worst of it, I don't see why he can't bounce back here, especially if he's able to, take them a long way again on the front end at a relatively sensible pace. I don't know if colic was the reason. I certainly on the podcast gave my opinion as to whether or not that affected his race. Feel free to listen to the one last week to hear my thoughts on that. I think really if he's going to run better, if he's going to improve and try and take down American Pharoah, he's going to have to go back to be the horse that we thought he was, coming out of the Santa Anita Derby, coming out of the San Felipe, an undefeated horse that looked like the sky was the limit. You're right. I thought he should have, especially the way he cut the corner and the others floated wide, I thought he should have ended up winning by daylight. So it's a little head-scratching, and it's hard for me to lean on him too much based off of that effort. But if he gets overlooked, and American Pharoah is 1-2, and Firing Line is the second choice, I guess I could make a case for him turning the tables.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. As always, price comes into the equation here. It certainly, I don't think he's going to win, but at the right price, I might just have to bet like he's going to win. We'll have to see how the betting goes in this race. It's going to be very interesting. I also think it might be, depending on the draw, I'd be curious to see if maybe he was more comfortable outside of American Pharoah. Put somebody else in that position maybe of having to be the stalking horse. I'm not saying he'd definitely run better, but it would certainly change the dynamics in a way where, combined with the right price, I might be willing to take a little bit of a shot on Dortmund. Firing Line almost won the Kentucky Derby. If Firing Line changes leads, Matt Bernier and I believe he probably would have won the Kentucky Derby. However, this is not the case of a maiden or a horse with 2 races who didn't change leads, and you think, oh, they're going to keep learning, they're going to get better, they're going to improve, they're going to figure out racing more, and I can use that lack of lead change as a reason to project improvement. For me, it just makes me wonder about where this guy is in his training, how far he really wants to run, and that hanging on the wrong lead through the stretch. I can't spin you any case that that's a positive, and it makes me want to head back towards the Baffert horses and away from him. And it pains me to say that, because if Firing Line wins the Preakness, I've got a really good shot at winning the bobblehead in our contest, our Triple Crown contest with me, you, and Matt Bernier.
Well, that's only if American Pharoah runs out, remember, because I'm the leader right now in the clubhouse. I don't remember exactly what the points are. I think I had 15 coming into the Derby. American Pharoah got me another 25. So I've got 40 points.
What do I have? Do you know what I have between? I've got Carpe's prep win. I've got Firing Line second. I think those are my only points.
Yeah, so you got 5 for Carpe's prep win. I believe you got 10 for Firing Line second, or maybe it's 15. I'll have to go back and review the details with Mr. Bernier. But either way, you still got, even if you win with your 25, you got to hope American Pharoah doesn't hit the board in order for you to be sitting in the driver's seat.
Well, but still, we'd have the Belmont in 3 weeks, and I'd pick up points on you. So I'm
yep.
But that will be my sort of my built-in hedge bet here on Firing Line. But realistically, what do you think this horse's chances are? Our little contest aside.
I think your analysis was spot on. I know there's a lot of talk that he might have won had he changed leads. To me, it's a bit of a concern, especially coming back off of 2 weeks rest when he was 6 weeks rest off of the Sunland Derby. The word that Simon Callahan had been saying was the 6 weeks is the perfect time between races for him. I couldn't have mapped out a better plan. To run him back in 2 weeks after that big effort when he doesn't change leads, at the price he's likely to be, I'm not going to be wagering on him winning, put it that way.
I always hesitate to use the bounce word because I do think it's so overused in handicapping in general, but I do think when you're talking about a pattern where you have 6 weeks off and then back in 2 weeks and that big effort, that the Ragas and Sheets players might be onto something if they're thinking bounce from Firing Line. The horse we're going to talk about last, to me, I've got strong opinions about. It's American Pharoah, of course. There's a lot of different camps on this horse, and I was a little worried how hard he was ridden, how many times he was hit during the Derby. I was really curious to see how he'd come back in works. And to bring it back to contests for a second, John Nichols, the head clocker at Churchill Downs, who actually won outright one of our contests last weekend on NHC Qualify to move himself into third on the NHC Tour, certainly a major player for that award. But I talked to John this week about how Pharoah has looked in the days since the Derby, and his exact quote was, "He looks like he never ran." It doesn't seem to him and his eye that race took that much out of him. And if that's the case, boy, oh boy, because it's my feeling that how the Churchill Dirt was playing that afternoon didn't really agree with his running style. I don't think it was the same track that he trained so well over in the morning. He didn't look great to me cornering around those turns like you had mentioned, Mike. I think this might be a horse who won despite the surface on Churchill Downs and might be one of these Derby winners who comes back sharp in 2 weeks and just goes ahead and runs off the screen. Maybe there's a little bit of my heart talking in that. I already have my Belmont tickets, but what are your thoughts? Am I getting too excited over the Pharoah here?
No, I think that's a fair assessment. I think in terms of wagering, my only concern with him would be what the price you're likely to get in the Preakness, because I'm thinking it's probably going to be 4 to 5 or even lower, especially since there's only likely going to be 6 other opponents facing him on Saturday. But you're right. I mean, if you can make a case that he was maybe not handling the track as well as some of the others, you certainly can make a case that he traveled a lot further than any of his the horses that he beat, and if you can see that he's training really well and that the effort didn't take a whole lot out of him, I think we could be looking at a really special horse because in all of his other races, he won on brilliance. He won on just being sheerly better than everybody else. The Derby was the first time I really saw that level of heart and that level of class that you want to see out of a Triple Crown contender and a really special horse. We weren't sure we would see that from American Pharoah. On Derby Day, he kind of proved that to me, at least. That's
a really great point. Folks had questioned what's going to happen when this horse is in a real fight. Well, he was in a real fight, and he kept right on running, and that did show something. And even though, I mean, again, I take the point that I'm not saying it wasn't the trip that he wanted to have on Derby Day. It was perfect to sort of prove that he was the best horse by being clear and staying out of trouble. But he still covered a lot more ground, several lengths more than Firing Line did. And I think you put him back in a situation in a short field where presumably he's not going to have to lose that ground. These are extra lengths that Firing Line is going to have to make up beyond the one length that he lost by in the Kentucky Derby. I think he could find it a very difficult thing. I was a guest. I was happy to be invited a guest on my buddy Gil Alexander's Beating the Book podcast before the Derby. I'm actually going to be back on Beating the Book to talk about the Preakness on Thursday. If folks want to check that out, Gil Alexander does a great job on that pod, talking about whatever the gambling sports issues of the day are. I particularly enjoy his NFL stuff, but he himself is a great baseball handicapper, and it's just a great show in general. And I'm happy to be back on there. But I said on his show before the Derby that I thought if Faro won the Derby, that he would win the Triple Crown. Words that my wife then kind of embarrassed me by repeating right in the wake of the Derby, just because, not embarrassing me because I don't believe it, but I wasn't quite prepared to defend the position when you brought it up in the immediate aftermath of the Derby, Mike, on the Players Pod. But, I'm just going to stick with that prediction, because sometimes you go out there and you say bold things, and, anybody can equivocate and say, oh, this can happen, that can happen, but that's not fun to listen to, and that's not why we're here. So I'm going to stick with my guns. Faro's my horse. I'm not saying I'm going to bet the farm to win. I think this is a situation where you probably want to get him tied up in multis. There's going to be some interesting racing on the Preakness undercard, and that's the way I'm going to go. But I think I'm going to want to have, at the end of the day, about 80% of my play tied up in the Faro. Do you have any other specific betting thoughts about this race?
I don't, and I think you might be right, especially in a short field, that the value probably lies in the races surrounding them, especially if you have a strong opinion like yours and like mine, that American Pharoah is your clear most likely winner, probably even 60 to 70% most likely, and given the field that he's likely to face, you might just try and find value by putting together some opinions in the intervening legs, or you might just sit back and say, boy, I'm going to watch this one as a fan and root for another chance at history in 3 weeks at the Belmont.
Here's one way you can have a bet on American Pharoah that's essentially a free roll. Go ahead and buy your tickets to the Belmont now. Even if he doesn't win, worst case, you end up with tickets to the Belmont, which is a beautiful thing. And if he happens to win, you can feel smug and satisfied that the tickets are worth a heck of a lot more than the face value you paid for them. That might be the best bet of all. Are you going to be out there Belmont Day either way, Mike?
I'm not sure at this point, but kind of leaning towards yes.
Excellent. It should be fun. Now, I know you had a couple of thoughts on some historical trends for the Preakness that we wanted to talk about for a minute. We didn't end up writing it in the rundown, but we were chatting about it earlier today.
Well, that's okay. There are a couple historical trends. I mean, and I was tweeting out a little earlier in the week. One of the things I like about Preakness Week is it's a little less crazed than the lead up to the Kentucky Derby, and so you can take a little bit more time to sit back and enjoy the bit of the history. And so I tweeted out the link to Secretariat's Preakness win on YouTube. He famously, of course, is remembered of any of the Triple Crown races for either the Derby, where he still holds the track record and the Derby record, or of course his Belmont, which is just jaw-dropping, perhaps one of the greatest races ever. A lot of times people forget his Preakness and how brilliant Secretariat's Preakness was, where Ron Turcotte was last the first time through the stretch and realized, boy, I got to make my move sooner than later, and does the kind of move you almost never see, not only never see a jockey try and do, but you certainly never see a horse win off of it, which is the sweeping wide last to first move on the clubhouse turn in a two-turner out race. It's the kind of move that's usually a recipe for failure. And I guess you have to be a horse like Secretariat to pull it off. And if you haven't seen that, or if you haven't seen it recently, at least, I urge you to go watch that one on YouTube. That's a fun one.
That's an expression around the racetrack here. This horse would have to be Secretariat to win from there. You watch the Preakness, you understand why that expression exists. And I believe didn't Shams jockey? Didn't he have a quote that you'd mentioned before about that's relevant to that?
Right, well, Lafitte Pincaille was on Sham, and when he saw that kind of move from Turcotte on Secretariat, he kind of started salivating. He thought, okay, here's my chance. That move's never going to win. I'm looking good at the top of the lane. And at one point, Sham looked like he was about to threaten, kind of ranged up a little, but in the stretch, the other impressive thing about it is Turcotte never moved one bit down the lane, never asked Secretariat at all, just rode him like a rocking horse and was never threatened at the line. It was just an amazing effort.
When we talk about great Preaknesses, I always think back to the most recent Preakness that I attended in person, and I believe it was 10 years ago. Unbelievable that I haven't been to Old Hilltop in that long. I'm talking, of course, about a Fleet Alex nearly going down, getting bumped, coming around for home, and managing to bring it back together and re-rally and win impressively on his way to winning 2/3 of that year's Triple Crown. I just think that's another tape I would encourage people to go to YouTube and go back and check out. Certainly, to me, for my money, one of the more impressive performances in the history of the race.
Oh, absolutely, and I personally rank it right up there with Secretariat's Belmont as just one of the most jaw-dropping races I've ever seen. It's the kind of race that I never tire of watching. I love both Tom Durkin's call and Dave Rodman's call. I get something out of it each time I watch it. It's really one of my favorite races, and I've said it a few times I think on the podcast and certainly over Twitter. I still think a Fleet Alex is the closest we've come in recent years to a Triple Crown winner. Not least because you can almost make a case that he got better with each race of the Triple Crown series, something that often is not the case, and oftentimes the Triple Crown preps and the Triple Crown, the 3 races right in a row, end up taking their toll on them. Fleet Alex, his Belmont was almost it may have very well have been his best race, and just the fact, and somebody tweeted out in response to me posting the replay and saying, and I agree 100%, Fleet Alex is part of the reason why I believe horses are still good enough to take the Triple Crown, because he certainly was good enough. It just didn't work out for him.
Absolutely. You have to remember he had that major flow excuse in the Kentucky Derby, attacking that hot pace, and in a race that set up perfectly for a closer like Giacomo. But I think the argument can be made that he ran as good a race as anybody in that year's Derby, and certainly with a little bit different racing flow, with a little bit different racing luck, he would be our most recent Triple Crown winner, and we wouldn't be looking at this drought since 1978. Another tape I want people to go back and look at. If you're in the mood to get yourself psyched for the Preakness, go back to 1989. Check out my guy, Easy Goer, and his battle against Sunday Silence there. It's just, I can only describe it as, despite the result that didn't go my way, the reason we watch horse racing is when you can see 2 amazing equine athletes do that. Is that one that you'd also consider among your favorites?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's weird because in a way, the Preakness as the middle gem is sort of the forgotten. It's not the forgotten one, obviously, but it's the one that seems to get the least amount of hype. In a lot of ways, and maybe because of that, it's one of my favorites, and I think you end up getting some really special efforts, and that one certainly is one of the top ones for me too. And in recent years, another one I tweeted out, and there's a little bit of kismet involved in it too, because her sister is running on the Black Eyed Susan undercard, but Rachel Alexandra's win 2009 is just another one that was absolutely amazing, and just a special race to watch, and there's so many of them. I guess I could go on. I could spend probably hours looking at all of the different runnings of the Preakness that are posted up onto YouTube.
Well, follow along, folks, at DRF Formulator. He'll probably be sharing a few more of his favorites as we get closer to crunch time. And, one of the best follows on Twitter for horse racing fans, as far as I'm concerned. Mike pumps out so much great content. You can follow me at @LoomsBoldly for various snarky comments and occasional horse racing analysis, not to mention some pretty fine drinks recipes. Let's take the rest of the show. Let's just take a couple minutes here. I'm going to probably, this might turn into a bit of a soliloquy, so Mike, feel free to interrupt wherever you see appropriate, or you can wait till the end and comment. But I want to do a tale from the track. We haven't done one of these tales from the track in a couple of weeks. last time we did one, Mike shared his story of horse racing ownership. I want to tell you something that happened to me in the early days of my horse racing ownership. Not currently on the owning side of things. Having a 2-year-old daughter sort of has put me in a position where if I own horses again, and I may, I definitely would want it to be something I could share with her. In this day and age, the discretionary income is sort of going straight into the college fund. But back in the day, many moons ago, I was fortunate enough to become good friends with a guy named Sean Clancy. I worked for Sean as the original handicapper at the Saratoga Special newspaper when we debuted in 1999 or 2000, whenever it was. And Sean had a vision at that time for a business model for owning racehorses that I thought was really clever, and I got in on as an investor. And the idea was to find flat horses that would make good jump horses, run them a couple of times on the flat, have a little bit of fun, and then sell them as jump prospects. The first horse we owned was a horse named Extra Check, who did not get to the winner's circle for us. He had some bad luck running into some good ones, but he did pay for himself. He caught a lot of extra checks himself running underneath, and we had fun with him. But then the second horse we owned was a horse named Goodnight Shirt. Now, if you're not a big fan of steeplechasing, that name might not mean all that much to you. But here's the story of Goodnight Shirt. Sean saw him walking around at Fairhill Training Center and just loved him on looks. He was by concern. He was a big, tall, beautiful horse. Looked like he could jump a hurdle from the time that he ever set foot on a racetrack. It seemed clear that was going to be his destiny. We tried him a few times on the dirt. Not surprisingly, got kind of outpaced, but he showed some ability. And we had a feeling that when we stretched him out on turf, good things were going to happen. The first time we did that was August 7th, 2004. I was on a heater at the time. A couple of weeks earlier, I'd been out at Del Mar, and with my mentor, William Murray, and my good friend, Frank Scattoni, we'd hit the pick six. So we were feeling fat, we were feeling happy. I came back to Saratoga, bankrolled for the meet, and I remember watching that race at Pimlico in the racing office. And the downside of watching in the racing office was I would have felt like way too much of a newbie to be screaming and hollering the way I wanted to for the first time my horse won a race. And indeed, that's what happened. The Shirt got up and got the job done. We ended up running him back about 5 weeks later. Unfortunately, I couldn't be there for that one either. That was also at Pimlico. It was the day before my wedding. And I wasn't in a position where I had Wi-Fi. I couldn't even watch. So it was just the day before my wedding. Susan and I are walking around. We're making plans. We're making sure everything's going smoothly. And I'm just waiting for this phone to ring. And Sean calls me up. He won. And then he says, but there's an inquiry. So there we are. He got out a little bit, I believe, in the stretch that day. And here I was from the highs of highs, about to get married to the love of my life, and my horse wins, to, we might get our horse taken down. It was a little bit of an emotional roller coaster at that point. But indeed, he stayed up, and we were thrilled. We really thought we had something. 2 for 2 on the turf. And then, that's just sort of where the story takes a turn. You know, the plan always was to sell the horse to be a jumping prospect. We ran one more time at the Meadowlands that fall, and it was kind of funny. I mean, I've never seen a jockey look like startled the way our jockey was that day when he came into the paddock to look at the horse. He was a little intimidated, and I think that contributed to the ride that we got, and we did not win that day. But again, the plan was always to sell the horse, and we had an opportunity to do so. We got twice what we paid for him. We'd collected the 2 checks. This was exactly what the plan was. So it made sense to go ahead and pull the trigger and sell the horse. And when you do that, I'd say 9 times out of 10, it's exactly the right thing to do. This, unfortunately, was the 10th time out of 10, because Goodnight Shirt went on to become an aughts legend in the steeplechasing business. He won about $1 million. He won a race at Saratoga. He won graded stakes. He won the Iroquois. He won the Lonesome Glory at Belmont. And then to cap off what ended up being a pretty brilliant career, put together an amazing Grade 1 win streak the following year, including winning the Breeders' Cup steeplechase, we were always happy for the horse because he was a cool horse, and that's what you do. And we're not, we're not sullen people who would ever, let our own slight disappointment in not being involved color our opinions of the good people who bought him and the good horse that he was. Though I will admit it was very painful at one point when hanging out with Sean at a bar in the Maryland area, and somebody he barely knew came in, and so we were telling the story about that we used to own Goodnight Shirt, and the guy says, well, I guess you shouldn't have sold him. Like, yeah, thanks a lot, pal. We hadn't figured that one out ourselves. Thanks you for rubbing our nose in it. But, I'd kind of gotten over it. It's one of those things you just sort of file it under, that's the way that one went, and I don't think about it too much, and I don't let it beat me up too much. And then 2 weeks ago, Susan and I are in the Kentucky Derby Museum in Saratoga. We were at this really fun party, benefit for the museum, which is a great place, and it was cool. There was all this local food and booze, and it was just a cool atmosphere to watch the Derby. And at some point, we turn a corner, and there, speaking of rubbing your face in it, there's a giant exhibit with the silks, the saddle, the trophy, the whip, this entire exhibit devoted to, the steeplechase runner of the aughts, Goodnight Shirt. And there I was, once again thinking, man, I didn't need that $1 million anyway.
Oh, what could have been, huh?
It's just one of those things. It's just funny, but to have it come up, and there, yeah, I thought we were, I thought that was it. I was just going to go get another whiskey and beer as soon as possible. But Susan decides she wants to go into the kiosk and watch the tape of him winning the Breeders' Cup. And I, of course, was like, oh, you're going to really make me watch this? But I'll tell you what, we watched the race, and we saw him, and he was sort of lagging back in the first half of the race. When he made his move, I started cheering. He was too cool. His picture hangs on my wall. I love his beautiful white face. I'll tell you what, I rooted him home. It was exciting. So we watched the tape, and then we went back to the party and ate some more crab cakes and had a couple bourbons and got ready to watch American Pharoah do his thing. But so there you go. There you have it. There's my tale from the track, my story about me and Goodnight Shirt.
That's awesome. I love it. I actually, while you were talking, pulled up his PPs.
Oh, nice. We should tweet them.
I was just going to say, if it's not too much digging the knife in, I'll tweet them out.
Yeah, please do. Please do. I'd appreciate that.
You can relive and you can maybe comment. I'm guessing, yeah, I can see the 3 races trained by Elizabeth Merriman.
Great trainer, by the way. We had a great experience with her.
Yep. So you had it looked like, and maybe this is what you're getting at with the inquiry. I don't doubt that there may have been some issues with Goodnight Shirt, but it looks like the horse that ran second in that race, Kilcullen, was disqualified from second place. So the stewards might have been looking at a number of different things going on there. But wow, yeah, what a story, huh? And you're in good company. There's a lot of good owners and good breeders who can think, what could have been had they not let their horse get claimed away, had they not sold when they did. Even one of the top owners and breeders in California, the Y Gods, sold Shared Belief after his debut. So it happens. Take solace in the fact that you're in good company.
Oh, absolutely. It's just one of those crazy things. And I can say, though, it should have air quotes or asterisks or whatever you want to say. I can say I've owned a champion.
There you go. I can't. You'll always have that.
I think it was just one year, maybe for 2009 he won the Eclipse, but it is a pretty cool thing. I think actually they might have had the Eclipse Award as part of that exhibit in the Racing Museum. Have you been there at all or in a number of years?
If I have, it was probably back as a kid, so I certainly don't remember it. It's been a long time. But it's if I make it, if and when I make it to Saratoga again, it's the kind of thing I should absolutely do.
Oh, it's so much fun. I recommend that everybody listening check it out. A very, very cool spot. As far as our rundown goes, Mike, that's it. Any further thoughts before I take us home here today?
I think that's it, Pete. Do your thing.
Absolutely. Peter Thomas Fornatal for Mike Hogan. Until the next time, may you win all your Preakness photos.